Welcome once again to the Conversations That Matter podcast. I'm your host, John Harris, for an important discussion this morning. Even if you are not a Lutheran, you're going to want to listen to this discussion because no matter what denomination, or even if you're in an independent church organization you're part of, ministry, obviously social justice has made inroads into all kinds of places. And it's not even just social justice. It's modern secularism. It's modernity. It's all these anti-Christian secular notions or humanist notions, if you want to call them that have made their way deep into the heart of Western churches and ministries. And so as we're listening to what's happening in the Missouri Synod, I just like you to think about your own context, whether you're Lutheran or not. And if you are Lutheran, please write a letter, do something positive to help your denomination escape the tragic shipwreck that other denominations have fallen into. With me to help discuss this, because he is way more knowledgeable than me, is David Ramirez. David Ramirez is the pastor at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, and he's been following this very closely. So, David, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
So what's happening? I noticed there was a Twitter thread that gained a lot of attention in the Missouri Synod from Ryan Turnipseed, I believe is the name. At least that's the Twitter account name. And a number of people sent this to me. And it was just jaw-dropping that the Luther's Larger Catechism, there's a new edition that is to be published, and the changes are just incredible in regards to LGBT issues and just a whole bunch of things. So walk us through that. What is actually happening right now?
So I'd clarify one thing right off the bat, that the catechism itself was not changed. The stuff that has been found objectionable or unclear by a wide variety of folks, and undoubtedly the stuff that you saw was actually contained in essays that were included in with a new edition of Luther's Large Catechism. So the catechism itself, the text remains absolutely unchanged. But I think this goes to the heart of maybe some confusion in the project in general. And so it's no less concerning. So Luther's Large Catechism is obviously larger than the small one. And he's going on this tangent and that tangent. And so the plan was to provide annotations, notes, to help readers understand the context more. So very well and good. But for some reason, I think this kind of caused a lot of the problem, was that they decided to include something like 60 or 70 essays in the same volume. And I don't see how that makes a lot of sense, because that's one of our confessional documents that we not only use for teaching, but all pastors promise to uphold the teachings of the Large Catechism as a true and pure exposition of the Word of God. And so to connect these essays, it's not changing the text, but it's giving it tons and tons of teaching weight. I don't know if that makes sense, but by putting it in the same volume. And so this new edition with notes and essays, that came out on January 20th. And I'm giving the exact date for the listeners because things moved incredibly fast. So on the 20th, that new edition came out on Kindle, so people got it, and there was a lot of concern automatically of what was contained in these essays. As you alluded to, there was at best confusing language, at worst very troubling and bad terminology, bad frames, bad examples that seem to just meet or ape the leftist talking points that we see in kind of SJW or woke America, and so that caused a lot of concern. And you alluded to Ryan Turnipseed's thread, and it's actually not an anonymous account. Come to find out, I assumed it was. I've never met a Turnipseed in my life, but he's a real person. He's a layman. I think he's like 20 years old, out west somewhere. I'm not quite sure. But no, he confirmed he's a real person. And so I don't even understand or can relate who exactly said what, where, and when on Twitter. But I think credit for raising the alarm, or at least spreading the word, should be given to Ryan, because he put together a thread. I assume that's the same thread. It was like, I don't
Right.
know, 9 or 10 tweets all put together. And he kind of documented and was raising the alarm. And it was incredible how many people saw it. I think it was like 200 something thousand impressions, which I know not everyone, read it thoroughly, but that's huge for the Lutheran world. I don't know about other denominations, but Lutheran Twitter is pretty small. But that was incredible. And so the concerns that were raised there then got spread by a million different means. I saw so many emails that people either sent to me or said that they were talking to other people about it. Phone calls were being made saying, what in the world is going on? Because everyone thought, at least me, I shouldn't say everyone, I thought it was just going to be the large catechism with annotations. So I was kind of excited about the project, and I still am. I hope there's still a lot of good stuff that can be salvaged. But anyway, more and more concerns spread over the weekend. And finally, on Monday evening around 7:30, the president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Matthew Harrison, he put out a statement saying we're going to halt production or distribution of the book. And I know that some folks in the Synod and also on Twitter have said, well, this is really horrible because he's been mobbed by Twitter folks, and they've just whipped up this frenzy. And so this is really bad. And I can't believe that that's accurate. And I know for a fact it's not accurate because I personally know dozens and dozens of people who sent in letters. I think it's very dismissive and ridiculous to say that that the president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, who I don't think reads Twitter, is going to let a Twitter storm influence him like this. Full credit where credit is due. Everyone on Twitter, on Lutheran Twitter, really raised the alarm, and they were essential to get this relooked at. But I know, like I said, personally, dozens of people who sent in letters to the president, to their district officials, that's our local regional leaders. And if I know dozens and dozens of people, undoubtedly, and I don't think this is any exaggeration, hundreds and hundreds of people sent letters in, as he alludes to in his statement. Do you mind if I read that? Is that okay?
Please go for it. Yeah.
Thank you. So, well, yeah, he put it up on Twitter and Facebook. So the timestamp is 7:38 on Monday, and this is what is written: a message from President Harrison. Grace and peace to you in Christ Jesus. In light of the concerns raised, I have asked CPH to cease distribution of the new annotated large catechism. This will allow us time to evaluate the comments and critiques received and revisit our doctrinal review process, which is my responsibility. We steadfastly proclaim Christ crucified for the forgiveness of sinners and stand forgiven and unafraid, committed to Jesus Christ and his inerrant scriptures in the face of all cultural opposition. I ask for your patience. Reverend Dr. Matthew C. Harrison, President of the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. I think that this also shows us and the whole world and the church that that he received tons and tons of comments and critiques, and this is what caused him to put a pause. As someone, I don't know who said it, but someone said, he put a pause on this project. I also think that he owned the situation. I mean, he says, we need to evaluate, we need to review, and he said, this is my responsibility. So in the Missouri Synod, the chief doctrinal reviewer, the one who oversees doctrine and practice and is to address concerns like this, is President Harrison. And I don't understand all of the internal processes and who did what, where, when, but this project was done under the auspices of our CTCR, which is our theology and church relations committee or board that does a lot of doctrinal work, but also the office of the president. So I've got to really say that while I think that there were failures by the CTCR and the office of the president to let it get to this point, I'm really pleased and proud of our president who took responsibility and took the ball and said, okay, we got to deal with this. There's enough serious critiques. And this was kind of risky for him to do. It was gutsy. And it certainly didn't earn him a lot of friends. I mean, maybe it gained helped him gain respect among people who are concerned. But I mean, to halt production like this, I don't think this has happened in at least a decade or so. It's happened before, so it's not unique. But it hasn't happened in recent, at least extremely recent history. So I think it was a gutsy move. I think it was a faithful move, and I think it's good for him to ask for patience and to say, please let me do my job. And I think that anybody who cares about these issues, your viewers and especially the Lutherans out there, pray for him. Pray for him to be discerning and wise, and to continue in this boldness, I guess.
Yeah, I'm encouraged to see it because this is often not the case, especially in Southern Baptist circles, which I've covered probably more than any other denomination. But I would say it's the same way, I think, to an extent in PCA and other denominations, even some of these Pentecostal denominations that have problems with social justice. They don't tend to have leaders who are willing to then listen to what laymen are writing them, or lay pastors, or even just pastors. I mean, sometimes there's a professional class that develops in the managerial elites in these denominations, and they tend to run things. And in the Southern Baptist Convention, since I'm more familiar with that, you'll notice even at their annual meetings, when you have concerns come up from the audience, there's even favoritism when it comes to what microphone they call on, and strategies to shut down conversation or debate on topics that they don't feel are conducive to their agenda. And this is such a contrast to that, to have the president of a denomination say, we might have gotten some things wrong. A lot of people wrote in, let's put a pause on this and let's get to the bottom of it. That's unique. And I hope that the Lutherans, the Missouri Synod Lutherans, keep this attitude, because it's a good one. It means that there's at least some humility at the top. I want to show people because this is serious, though. We're positive about the fact that this is on pause, but correct me if I'm wrong. This doesn't mean that some of these changes won't actually go through. It's just.
No, you're absolutely correct.
Right.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that the objectionable material will be gone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I don't think you went into a lot of detail about what that objectionable material is. If I could just pull up, this is the, if people can see this, I think they can. This is the thread that people are talking about here. And, I don't know if there's more to this that David, you can add, but the accusation here is that it says, first, we have the LCMS speaking for conservative Lutherans entirely denying self-defense and bearing arms being moral. So that's the first issue. And I could read that if you want, but
well, if you don't mind me jumping in for a second,
I'd love for you to jump in. Yeah.
I would say this more generally, and I'll give my opinion on where each one of these fit in if you like.
Yeah.
But I think that the critiques on the on these essays and the content of these essays that were linked to the large catechism, they fall into a couple of categories of critique. One is, I think that some of these issues truly could just be a lack of clarity, frankly. Because some of these folks I know, and I've read other writings. I can't speak for them. I haven't talked to them in the last week. However, I think some places it's just a lack of clarity, and there is no false theology intended. So I just want to say that up front, but that's not to minimize the problem. I mean, you're going to put an essay next to a large catechism. You should be extra 100% clear. The second category I would say is whether it's intended or not. I can't see into people's heart, but whether it's intended or not, like I said before, there's a lot of terminology and examples and framework, assumed framework that has been imported into these essays that gets used in, I would say, an uncritical manner. Whether that's intentional or not is kind of immaterial. It's there, and it turns into a bunch of signaling for Marxist or woke ideas, and that's just bad, regardless of intention. That stuff's got to go. And then you have the issue of authorship, which I don't know if you saw. That wasn't talked as much online. In the Missouri Synod, we feel very strongly about who should teach authoritatively in the church. Historically, we don't have females or women writing and teaching theology, as you know, is very, very clear in the scriptures. We don't need to go all into that. That has been, we've been getting a slightly loosier and goosier about that in recent decades. And so there's several female authors who, of course, I don't know. I'm not trying to personally slander them, but they have no business teaching in a document like this. It's very inappropriate, and it goes against our history and tradition.
So
and I would
say some of these essayists are, though they cannot serve in a church, according to the doctrine of the Lutheran Church, they are permitted to give commentary on the very catechism used to teach people in the church.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Yeah. So there's been this reductionistic view that has gained in strength in the Missouri Synod, and this is a decades-old problem. The Missouri Synod used to be very clear about, the God-given order of creation, specifically between men and women in the home, in the church, even in the state or the civil government. And there's been this reductionistic drift to just say, well, what's authoritative preaching? And sometimes people avoid using the word teaching in the church, and they'll say, well, that means women can't be pastors. Yeah, but what the role of the pastor is defined as being the one who preaches and teaches. And so folks have tried to kind of go around this, and this is another sign of that. So that's a deeper issue than kind of these hot button actual words or phrases or things that were taught in the document. Another related concern on authorship was that we had some non-Missouri Synod folks. I don't know if you're aware of this. For some reason, another Lutheran body that split off of the very liberal ELCA, which we talked a little bit about last time. Some authors from what's called the NALC. Now we get into Lutheran alphabet soup, which makes everyone glaze over and fall asleep. But the NALC, to give them credit, they left the ELCA, but they still have female pastors. They still don't believe in inerrancy full-throatedly. There's just, I could go on and on and on. Inviting those guys, many of whom are guys with a lot of integrity, to leave what they left, but yet have them teach in this document makes zero sense. And then, of course, most egregiously there was an ELCA pastor that was invited to teach in this. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just absurd. So those are kind of the different levels of, I would say, confusion that's caused by this. But I know you want to get into the actual texts, but I just wanted to lay that out there.
Yeah, it's very important. Denominational boundaries being, I guess, on the borders of them being kind of undefined, or at least open to outsiders. And then
there's a time and place, like what you just said, like on the borders. I'm glad you put it that way, because if you're gonna have maybe like a church relations discussion or fellowship talks with someone, and you say, hey, let's write some things so we can talk to each other. But everybody knows that this is more of an exploratory document. This is not to be for, totally trustworthy stuff used in the parish or something like that. That's fine. What's objectionable is that you have these guys teaching in a book, writing essays that's connected to the large catechism, one of our confessional documents. And that should be our own guides. And that's not to say, oh, we're so arrogant and proud that we can't learn from anyone else. But it's saying, no, we've been blessed with lots of people who can teach faithfully. And why in the world would we have someone who we couldn't commune with because of no unity of doctrine, and yet they're going to teach the pastors, and then that trickle down into the parishes? It just does not make any logical sense.
Sure.
So
yeah, the more concerning thing, and one that I've seen in other denominations, is the whole let's approach this subject of women's roles, and instead of asking what is the design of God, they ask what are all the things that we can do without technically breaking a direct command.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Danny Aiken at Southeastern Seminary called this kinder, gentler complementarianism, and that's what he said he believed. And that well, there might be situations where even a female can preach on a Sunday morning, but it's very narrow. She can't have the role of an elder. But you see this. I remember when J.D. Greer was president of the Southern Baptist Convention, it was like women were on the staff in all these various categories of having authority, but they just couldn't be an elder. So they could do things that were, impacting the job of an elder. You could write even curriculum, that kind of thing was happening, at least in the Southern Baptist circles. And people at the top did not see a contradiction between that and Paul's exhortation, I do not permit a woman to have authority over a man. And it's fascinating to me, because I think obviously there's not a cross-pollination between the Southern Baptists and the Missouri Synod Lutherans. I don't think, at least, they're not going to the same conferences. They're in different parts of the country for the most part. But modernity affects all of them, all these denominations, and the slackening or the loosening of standards of the created order, the categories that God has given us, and the assumption that things are just arbitrary, seems to have invaded everywhere. And so,
yeah, I totally agree. And I like how you said that attitude of, well, why can't I, or what can I do? That's the wrong question.
Exactly.
I mean, we should just be thankful for God telling us who we are and who we are to be. I mean, it's kind of like if a young couple said, to their parents or to their pastor, and said, well, how far can we go? Not to be too salacious, but how far can we go?
Sure.
Instead of saying, how can we be careful about purity and what God has designed for marriage? And I mean, that's the wrong question. How far can I go to the fire before I can get burned? Wrong question. The question is, how can you be safe and careful?
Right. Right. So yeah, let's go through some more of this, and I'm going to see if I can share the screen here and show everyone what we're looking at. So that was one of the issues. I don't know if we want to. Can we go through all of these? Maybe not. Let's go through a few more though. So the next one, he says, this sounds very serious. We have an equivocation of homosexuality, pornography, sodomy, pedophilia, whorishness, and transgenderism with heterosexual fornication outside of sex. That is, the LCMS can't say sodomy is evil without softening it but so is straight sex before marriage. So the equivocation of these of the natural order that God has set up with these perversions of that. And I'll just read the language real quick. So some of us are burdened with homosexual lust, and he goes through this vice list. They are more often, they are the speck in our neighbor's eye rather than the log in our own. For decades, if we didn't wink at fornication, we certainly turned our eyes from it as well. So it's blaming the Missouri Synod for, or Lutherans, I guess, for turning a blind eye to these other sins, which maybe there's a point to be made here, but it strikes to me, it hits me as they're softening these legitimate sins that are at our gates, barbarians at the gates, ripping down the gates, coming in, and they're saying, yeah, but it's really the real problem isn't those guys. Don't pay attention to those. The real problem is what's happening, further back. And it's like, guys, there may be problems further back, but the barbarians are ripping down the gates. That's how I see it. What do you think?
I honestly have the exact same take, and I'm pulling up my version, not version, but I'm pulling up what what uh what was said in this the fuller the fuller context, because I honestly think that where this paragraph goes wrong is actually right where you where it cut off in the screenshot that you have.
Oh, okay.
Where so it says we shudder in disgust when it suits us. Well, I just want to read the rest of it. We shudder in disgust when it suits us, forgetting that we too follow our hearts, that organ which produces every evil thought and sexual immorality. With the seeming implication, because I do want to not pretend like I know exactly what the intention was, with the seeming implication that because we're sinners, we shouldn't shudder in disgust at these horrific sins. And I think that's you're right. I believe there is a point to be made that the church being soft on heterosexual adultery or fornication, things like that, did open the door to worse things. I think that the author does have a point if that's what's trying to be said. But man, I totally agree with you. It seems like, hey, just because you have a sin, you shouldn't be disgusted by these things. And isn't that how that passage from Matthew is used all the time? Judge not, judge not, judge not. And the spirit of all sins are the same. Well, obviously, all sins are the same in some sense. All sins are damnable before God. All sin, you break one point of the law, you break it all. But to me, what the author should have said was not we shudder in disgust when it suits us, but rather we shudder in disgust, and we should, about homosexuality and pedophilia and transgenderism, ... And we should also shudder in disgust at adultery and fornication and all these other things, because I think you're absolutely right. It is softening our proper reaction to these sins. And instead of saying, well, we're all sinners, or giving that impression, we should say no. And that should drive us to even see our own sins. I mean, there's a point of saying you don't want to be a Pharisee. But like what you said, I mean, the barbarians are not at the gates. They're inside the city and raging. And to write something like this is like a clanging gong. I mean, it is just so foolish when parents are worried about their kids getting groomed at school and by every, Disney product and every movie company. I mean, it's a lack of situational awareness and a lack of understanding of the context and what the war is being waged out there.
Well, Matthew 7:5 says, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And so if you're going to be true to the passage, then it's like, then we should stop being so soft on it. And obviously there's no example cited here, but the presumption is that we were all soft. We're complicit in this. Okay, stop. And now take the speck out. You're calling all these other perversion specks. So it kind of reorients, though, the person who says, I want to put a stop to this grooming or this perversion that's impacting our kids' lives. They're going to hear this, and the wind's going to be taken right out of their sails. Like, I guess I better stop and better examine myself first. It's like, no, you have a right instinct here. So
the effect is horrible.
It is. Yeah. There's, I maybe my cynical side thinks that the person who wrote this probably that is what they intend, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's not, but it's either extreme ignorance or some malicious.
Well, and I do not know the author, but this is one of the female written essays, and so I don't know if this comes from a quote unquote overly bleeding heart, so to speak,
right?
Or I don't know. I don't know the lady, but not only are the words not well put, and regardless of intent, I believe undoubtedly will have an effect of softening our understanding and rightful horror at these things. But she shouldn't have been writing this in the first place, plain and simple, at all. So
Yeah, no, that is a big problem. Why don't we go to the next issue here
Sure.
on the list? Ryan Turnipseed says the conservative confessional Lutherans are saying that Genesis is entirely separate from any scientific theories. And he quotes, it says, like the creeds, Genesis has no interest in scientific theories. So what do you make of this? Is this a soft peddling of Darwinism somehow?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Frankly, it really isn't.
Was this a hit and a miss?
I'm pulling it up, so just bear with me for a second. I'm sorry.
Well, you're pulling up. I'll just read the passage in
please
question.
do.
These views did not begin with the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed with Irenaeus or Augustine. Instead, they date back to the very beginning of Holy Scripture into the first two chapters of Genesis. Like the creeds, Genesis has no interest in scientific theories. It does not seek to explain in scientific detail how God made all things, but rather that he made all things by his almighty word and what that means for how we view the world and everything in it. And it goes on.
Right.
So Ryan Turnipseed is saying this is an attack on Genesis, like it's not literal or something.
Yeah. So the author, I'm not super close with him, but he's a friend of a friend. He affirms six-day creation. He's not an evolutionist.
Okay.
And in the rest of the essay, I think he does clean this up. But I'm not going to lie, and I'd say it to his face. I think the sentence particularly, like the creeds, Genesis has no interest in scientific theories. That's just a bad way to phrase it. It does not seek to explain in scientific detail. Well, that's true. However, it gives us facts and historical details of creation, which by definition will exclude certain false theories or beliefs about Genesis, like old Earth or evolution, all of those kinds of things. Here, I would categorize this of just a lack of clarity. I really do think this one was unintentional. However, at the same time, this is why you need really careful editing. And if you're going to put essays next to the large catechism, you have to be clear, and you don't need sentences like that, because just on its face, Genesis does have interest in a sense about whether certain theories are true or false, because Moses by inspiration records certain details that naturally exclude certain things. I honestly am going to chalk this one up for a lack of clarity. I think in the rest of the essay, he makes it clear that he is saying he's not denying that Genesis is historical. I know he's not pushing any type of Darwinism, and what his point is, even though he uses some poor words, I would say, is that we've got to go deeper than just talking about creation science. I would say, though, this is a problem perhaps of attitude. I don't know anyone who only just stops there. Who are these people? Do they really exist? Let's just think about creation science and not about the other things that Genesis has to say. It's almost like a straw man. So, yeah. But I would chalk this up to a lack of clarity, frankly.
Yeah, and it is important if you're going to, like you said, write a document like this. The burden of proof lies on those who wrote it for clarity's sake, not the person who's reading it and seeing red flags or yellow flags. The next one to me this is a bigger deal. I'm just going to quote, it says, gender dysphoria is a form of suffering. It primarily concerns one's sense of self, not one's deeds. It is only one reason people might see themselves as transgender. Christians with gender dysphoria generally continue to experience it no matter how much they grow in faith and love toward God. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. This is
what in the world? What in the world? Any other sin?
Yeah.
Christians, we'll pick something that's a hot button now. Christians with racial animosity and hatred against other races, they generally continue to experience it no matter how much they grow. Like, we wouldn't say this about so many other things.
Yeah. It is, and this is one of those spots where as I said before, intentional or not, the author is taking on the framework of the world. I mean, you're identifying someone that their true identity, even though now that they are a Christian, is their sin. I mean, that's not how the Bible speaks. I mean, the Bible, and also it's a denial of the power of God's word and of sanctification by the Holy Spirit through the means of grace. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, you said it well. Would we say this about other sins?
Right.
It is totally taking on the frame of the world, specifically psychological understanding of these things. And I mean, we don't need to go down a rabbit hole, but I mean, the psychologization of the church is just a disaster. And so this statement is totally taking on the frame of the world. And even if I'm sure the author would say these things are wrong, that's where you start seeing the wedge. You start seeing the wedge between, and I'm not saying this author would say this, but you see the wedge and the softening and the pseudo acceptance of, well, this is their feelings, or this is their identities. We can't condemn that. An orientation isn't sinful; it's the actions. Right. I mean, that's when you start getting a wedge, and you start seeing the softening towards these sins.
That's a problem I've seen in the broader evangelical world a lot, that they take on this psychological reading, I guess, of the human condition, and then impose that upon theology. And it's happening all over the place. In fact, in very conservative circles, this idea that same-sex attraction isn't really sin, that's just this orientation. It's like, you wouldn't, I hate the fact that this is an exception that's made, because there's so many other sins that we never say that about. Never, you have this wife beating tendency. I guess you just hate your wife. That's just who you are. We wouldn't say you're designed that way. Would we ever say that?
Yeah.
That'd be a Me Too moment.
Yeah.
One of the other things in this, and I don't want to wax long just because there's so many tweets about this from Turnip Seed, but social justice is used in multiple essays in this particular document in a positive way. There's references to economic and social privilege in an article by John Arthur Nunes, and that this is basically puts it in the same category as theft. But the social justice. Here's like one line. I'll just give you a representative line. This is from a Naomi. I don't know if I can pronounce this. Naomi Masaki. The center of numerical growth of Christians has shifted from the northern to the southern hemisphere, particularly Africa. European and North American churches senselessly impose social justice agendas upon these younger churches to maintain their supremacy. And there's multiple essays with this kind of thing.
Well, if I could respond to that one,
please do so.
So, Professor Masaki was a professor I had at the Fort Wayne Seminary. What I think he is trying to say is that I believe he is going after the liberal Lutheran and other liberal church bodies that are trying to force traditional bodies in Africa, Asia, and other places. They're trying to ram the homosexual agenda down their throats, and they're using money to back themselves
up. So he's
up.
Actually making a good point here.
Yeah, like social justice. I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but
so
and I did not read his essay. Yeah, well, I mean, but he said social justice agendas. Is that correct?
Yes, European and North American churches senselessly impose social justice agendas.
Yeah.
Upon
he's talking churches. He's because so the Missouri Synod has been approached by literally dozens of Lutheran church bodies all around the world, not just from the third world, but also other places in Eastern Europe and places like that, and Western Europe now, who they want help because they used to be part of the Lutheran World Federation, and now that they've gone really pro homo, to put it bluntly, a lot of these younger and poorer, financially speaking, churches in the third world, the LWF and liberal Lutherans will use money and the withholding of money to force them to adopt pro-gay or other items on the social justice agenda. So I think you got to read it the other way.
So this is actually a good point against social justice. So that
Yeah.
So here's the weird thing though. There's another essay, and I'm looking at this one by Leopoldo A. Sanchez.
Yeah, Leopoldo Sanchez. Yep.
And it says social justice deals with the promotion of justice in society. It best fits in a discussion of active righteousness, which to me, I'm just I'm confused by this, because it's like, if in this other essay, social justice is a negative, as you say, that's North American and European churches are senselessly imposing upon these other regions, then it winds up in another essay being a positive. So there's
Yep.
So which is it, right? Is the question,
Yep.
I guess. And then of
Yeah.
course, those who impose or possess economic and societal privilege are somehow in danger of breaking God's law against theft. So yeah, it's confusing, I guess, to say that maybe that's the better term to use here. And not that it's all pro social justice, but there's mixed signals.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a big problem. And I think that while the Misaki read is more in a negative way, I do think that it is undeniable that there are so many terms that are, I would say, uncritically used. Even if we want to be super generous and say we don't know what the intentions were, the effect is not just confusion, but signaling for the left. And so terms like social justice, like you said in the Sanchez article or essay, is used in a positive light. Notice how it's not really defined very well either. Later on in a different essay by a guy by the last name of Latimer, I think it's about hating your neighbor. He uses the term racism, never defines it. And that's what we have to understand. And that's what we have to understand about the context or reading the signs of the time. And that is that these words are not created or used in a vacuum. They have a meaning. And if you don't define it very clearly of what you mean and what you don't mean, then people will naturally and rightly believe that you're using it the way that it's used in the public square. So you use social justice and you're not super careful about, hey, I don't mean it like those Marxists, but I want to use the term because I want to baptize it or whatever. I think that's a fool's errand anyway, but for the sake of argument, if you're going to use it, you got to be real careful with it. So yeah, social justice, racism, gentrification gets talked about. I mean, all these things that match up boom for boom, step for step with lots of leftist causes and talking points, and they're uncritically used. And like you said before, is this purposely subversive or is this unintentional? Well, either way, in my opinion, it's bad news. It's confusing and it's going to cause problems.
Right.
And the effect is that this woke stuff worms its way in.
One of the things too along the social justice lines I was looking at here in the thread is one of the essays. I don't know who wrote this one. Talks of well, I'll just read it. I write these words from the rectory of a Lutheran Church of St. John the Evangelist in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, a neighborhood experiencing gentrification. And by the way, I live like 2 hours from New York City, so I know exactly what he's talking about. While there is an overall improvement for many as the rents and cost of living rise, there is selective intensification of impoverishment for some. The world does not consider the wrong and will not notice that the neighbor is placed at a disadvantage. And so Ryan Turnipseed is taking, and I think the impression I get from this thread is there's major issues in it, like the issues we talked about in regards to transgenderism and homosexuality. I mean, there's another part that says the Christian with sexual dysphoria or the homosexual Christian is one of us, a redeemed Christian and also a sinner. There's language like this. And then there's also things like this gentrification. I think the question that I have when I look at something like that is, well, why this is a very important document. Why is it in there? It's not as if this is wrong to be concerned about people who are displaced, which, by the way, for those who don't know, I live in New York. The social programs here in this state are just, I mean, people, there's a town, Roscoe, New York. It's in the middle of the Catskill Mountains, rural area, fly fishing capital of the world, by the way. That's their claim to fame. And it's become now a drug town because the people, it's become a place where HUD housing went in, and there's a number of towns I can tell you about like this. And now it's people who are on the dole, who are just living there. And so now they have problems with drugs and with crime, and that's all over the state. It's a liberal state, and the policies are very progressive. So people who are homeless or people who want to take advantage of these programs, there's plenty of places to go and take advantage of these programs. And I'm not saying that in a way that I'm not trying to say don't have compassion. I'm just saying that contextualize this. When people scream about gentrification, because a lot of leftists do, just know that it's not as if though people are now just kicked to the curb, they're out on the street. And I mean, it could be sad to some extent if the rising cost of living you can't quite pay for living in the place where you used to live. But it's not the villain that some of these people are making it out. And there are positive effects of this. Anyway, I'm going on my own tangent here because I'm frustrated with people misrepresenting.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
New York and kind of what's happening here. But I guess the question I have is why some of these little things end up making it to the essay. Because if you study the social justice stuff, you'll know that gentrification is one of their big examples.
It's a buzzword.
Where racism is and where repression lies. It's in gentrification. And it's like, no, it's not. That's not what gentrification is. Who's the guilty party? The person who bought up the property and made it look nice. Oh my goodness, they're so racist. So
well,
anyway.
There's another example in that same essay, which further, adds to what you're saying, is where I don't have it in front of me, but this is the Nunez article, and he complains about I shouldn't say complains. He says, basically in-group favoritism is, I mean, he doesn't use that term, but that's what he's getting at, will sometimes exclude minorities from, a leg up in business, or new immigrants who come to America. And, it's just kind of amusing, frankly, that he brings that up, because if my parishioners read that, they'd say, well, why are there federal and state programs that benefit immigrants over and above native Wisconsinites? I mean, it's right. Just, what world do you live in? Or even if you want to say, hey, some of the leftist talking points have a kernel of truth in them, and we do need to talk about it as Christians, fine. But why are all the examples? Why are most of the concerns leftist talking points, and you're using their buzzwords, and you're using their terminology, and you're using their examples uncritically, and not talking about like what you said about the effects of folks coming in for public housing and messing up a town? Why are you dancing to the tune of the wokesters, to put it bluntly?
Yeah, no, I think that you captured my frustration in a very simple sentence, because I do see the effects of that around me. And because I think what I'm seeing is when people are pushed out of these areas, if you want to even call it pushing, when they can no longer afford to live in these areas, or they find that it's to their advantage to live somewhere else that's cheaper, they will go into these small towns. And what about those people who live there sometimes their whole life? And the lives of their grandparents, and the old homestead is there in this small upstate New York town. And now it's overrun with drug problems, with crime. It's just, we're only allowed to look at one example of suffering and not take into account the full range of what's happening. So yeah, that does get under my skin, and that's why I went off. But we've already gone almost an hour here, so I just want to put a cap on it if we can. What can Lutherans do? I mean, obviously there's some positive movement from the president here, but what would you want them to do even now, as they're hearing this and they're concerned that this kind of thinking is making inroads in their denomination potentially? Should they write letters? What should they do?
Yeah, I mean, I said before, they should pray for the president, everyone who's going to be looking at this document. And, I'd reemphasize that. But also, I would encourage people to, if they were able to get a version, the electronic version before it was, now you can't get it anymore. It's off the websites. You can't buy it. So, yeah. So if you if you do have it, or if you can get your hands on it through a friend, to read it and to send in your thoughts about it to the office of the president or your district president, or if you're layman, run it by your pastor. Maybe he can help you write it, and do send that in, because the more concern that is shown, the more that will, I think, inspire the president and whoever else is reviewing it to actually look at this in a very serious, careful, and wise way. But the bigger point, I think, frankly, is a mindset point, to use that buzzword. The mindset that the world would have you take on when it comes to these terms is, well, why are you so uptight? Why are you so judgy? Why are you so concerned? You should be more trusting. I mean, this is a bad mindset, and it afflicts all North American churches, as you know, probably better than I do, because you watch this stuff more and you've been involved more. But the mindset of feeling ashamed or feeling timid about actually saying, no, I am going to be concerned. Like, we're ashamed to be concerned about protecting what we've been given by God. That's ridiculous, and we need to get over that. We need to really push back and say, no, I have every reason, and I would be a fool. I'd be an idiot. I'd be a sucker for Satan if I don't actually acknowledge what's right in front of my face. These words, this terminology, this framework, I'm not breaking the 8th commandment to say that this is bad news. I don't know what is in these people's hearts. I don't know all of their intentions, but you know what? Whether they are wittingly doing it or unwittingly, these terms and these examples and all this stuff, it fits right in line with what the woke movement is all about. Saying basically all the problems in the world are from white Christian patriarchy. So why would you dance to their tune? Why would you uncritically, or maybe even intentionally, use their talking points without distancing yourself from that stuff? If you want to baptize some of the concerns, okay, fine. If you want to say, hey, we should be concerned about the poor, but I'm not a leftist. I mean, maybe you should do that more often. And we got to have
Right.
a better mindset, because the Missouri Synod is, as you know, got into huge trouble a couple generations ago, and we basically lost our denomination, and then we retook it to a large extent, anyway, in the battle for the Bible. And I think that while it might not be at that level at this point, I think it's just as critical for us to keep our denomination and playing footsie with the world and playing footsie with these terms. That's exactly what happened back in the 60s. And everyone would scold people who raised the alarm. And we just have to not care about, the woke scolds at all. We just can't care, because what our heritage is too precious.
That's a good point you just made about not caring, because that's the main thing I've seen keeping people back. They don't want to be called racist, sexist, homophobic.
Yeah.
Just let it roll off your back. Just celebrate when it happens. That they call Jesus names too. And if they're calling you that name because you look like him and you're supporting his ethics, then praise God. So I love that point you just made. Well, thank you so much for explaining this to us, because it's outside of my wheelhouse a bit. And obviously I've seen this in other denominations, but the impression I get, I know I mentioned this to you before, I'll just say this briefly, we started recording, is that the Lutherans, Missouri Synod Lutherans, have a very intellectual class at the top, more so than Southern Baptists, I think. And they, there seems to be, all denominations perhaps have this, but in the Missouri Synod, as I've followed the issue with Concordia as well, there seems to be a huge difference, like huge, between the managerial elites, if you want to call them that, at the top, and then those who are the rank and file pew sitters who just believe the Bible. I don't know why I get that sense, but I just do. That's a wider gap. And the president, I do pray that his motivations are in the right place, and that's what I assume. But there may also be, I'm just saying, a fear there of, I mean, we're going to have a rebellion on our hands. We have, if we make the laymen in these denominations, swallow these essays, then they are going to see through it and they're not going to accept it. And we could have splintering. And, that's a good problem to have, though, by the way. That's great that in the Missouri Synod, you have such solid people that are willing to write letters, but keep doing it. Keep doing it.
Well, and I think that what you say, I think that there is some distance between the folks at the top and the folks out in the parish. I guess I would. So I'm not disagreeing. I guess I would just point out one other thing is that since the Synod is a very tight knit group of people, while I will admit, what you say, I think maybe it's a slight overstatement, but it does resonate with me because I know that myself and others who are my friends have been frustrated about words and terms and things being used, and we say, you know what that does for us in the parish? Come on, guys. And yet at the same time, because the Synod is very tight, letters and things like that really matter, because there's so many familial connections, old friendships, people who went to school together. And so doing those little things really, really matters, because there's all these close personal connections all the way up to the top. I mean, President Harrison is a guy who, when he goes to a conference, he goes out and has a beer and cigar with the guys. You know what I mean? It's still a very familial church in that way. And so it does matter to do that. There is a divide. And I do think that there is some ivory tower naivete out there. But my goodness, I mean, how wonderful it is. This is a silver lining I've been telling people I see in all this. How wonderful is it that in the Missouri Synod, we've been discussing and fighting over doctrine for the last week and a half. I mean, that's awesome.
Right.
That's good.
That's a healthy thing. Yeah. And I think so. What I'm noticing that's different than other denominations is perhaps I'm locating that disparity in the intellectual or academic side of so as you say, there's an accountability there where you can go out and share a beer and you have family connections and you're tight knit, which, and maybe that is the thing that's preventing Missouri Synod Lutherans from going as far down the road as some of these other denominations. There's a barrier there, but where there is that disparity, it's not in a okay, so I'll give you an example. Like in the Southern Baptist Convention, since I'm most familiar with that one, if you look at their annual meetings, it's not necessarily those at the top aren't there because necessarily they're intellectual or they have academic acumen. It's like the members of the resolutions committee, for example, they're handpicked. They're some of them don't have academic credentials at all, but they're there because they're party players, if you know what I mean, right? So there's this disparity that exists between a ruling class, which has serious corruption issues, and then those in the pews. Whereas in the Lutherans, it seems to me like it's you correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's an academic thing more than anything else. It's people who have gone through and gotten educations and are rubbing shoulders now with other academics and maybe other Lutheran denominations and secular world, etc. They start to form language and examples and ideas, and those in the pews never had the opportunity to form and don't want to form because they're not in that world, right? And that's where the divide comes in.
Yeah, so, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I'll admit that you're to sum up your observation, I guess with one word, is credentialism, and we do have that problem in the Missouri. And yeah,
I should hire you just to summarize my paragraphs into one word or one sentence. So
no, I love when you go off on these tangents, because I mean, I think the different churches can learn so much, even though we differ on so many issues of importance. But I mean, we all have the same enemy, And we all have it come at us with this woke stuff. And so I always find it very enlightening when you talk about the Southern Baptist Convention, so that we can learn from those mistakes. Because I mean, it's like the 60s and 70s, where there's an assault on the inerrancy of the Bible that didn't just happen in one denomination. It was across the board. Well, I mean,
right.
you mentioned modernism before. So, I mean, we need to understand how these attacks come, because they come in very similar ways, at least from what I can see.
Well, the good thing to land the plane on a good note here is that as soon as you get that insular, we are the elites, you must listen to us, we don't care what you have to say, you're done. And the Lutherans don't have that. And that's the encouraging thing. I've seen that in other places with the Lutherans. There is still an accountability and a willingness to listen. Even if you didn't, maybe the people that are critiquing this document don't have all the academic credentials or haven't served in all the places we've served in, they may have a point. They may be followers of Jesus. They may they may be someone worth listening to. And that to me is worth its weight in gold. And so please pray, as Pastor Ramirez said, for the Missouri Synod, for the president, and get involved, I guess, however you can in your denomination, and write letters. And so any final thoughts from you, Pastor Ramirez?
No, that's a great final note.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you. God bless. And if people want to go check out your sermons and stuff, can they go to, was it St. Paul?
Yeah, they're not. We don't have them online.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys are really traditional.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll talk about that after I stop recording here and
Sure.
find out why. But
Sure.
So, I mean, is there anywhere you want me to send people, or?
In terms of where to go, I mean, I would send. Several of my friends are guys in the Gottesdienst podcast. I don't know if you've heard of them. I think we spoke about them.
I've listened to some of their podcasts. They're excellent. Yeah. If people want to keep updated, Gottesdienst is primarily about worship and liturgy, but our life of worship should lead us to proper actions outside too, in the world and in the church. So I'd go to Gottesdienst if they want to see some updates on this and more commentary. Cool. All right. Thank you, Pastor Ramirez. God bless you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.